The screen in Grant Mercer's private office glowed like a confession, and what it showed made his blood turn cold. His new maid, Tessa, had lifted his 4-year-old son, small, fragile, legs that never kicked the way they used to, out of his custom wheelchair and wrapped him tight in a blanket like she was hiding him, not helping him. Then she whispered close to the boy's ear, "You won't have to be scared after tonight," and rolled him straight toward the one hallway door Grant kept locked with a fingerprint scanner, the door nobody in the house was supposed to touch, and the boy's little hands clawed at her shoulder as if he didn't understand where they were going, and Grant shot up so hard his chair slammed the wall behind him, because a rich man can buy steel gates and smart alarms, but he cannot buy a second chance when he thinks he's about to lose his child. Before we jump into what happened next, subscribe right now and tell me where you're watching from, because this story is not just about money or cameras. It is about what happens when fear makes a man control everything, until one small child and one quiet maid exposed the truth he never wanted to see. Now let me take you back, because the night Grant installed the first hidden camera, he told himself it was protection, not obsession, and he almost believed it. Grant Mercer wasn't just comfortable. He was the kind of wealthy man people argued about online, the kind whose name showed up on buildings, charity galas, and business headlines, the kind who could buy silence with a signature and buy time with a private jet, and he had built his life on one rule that never failed him. If you see danger before it arrives, you can stop it. That rule made him millions, then more than millions, and it also made him the loneliest man in his own mansion. The mansion was beautiful in the way museums are beautiful. Wide halls, shining floors, tall windows that swallowed the sun, a kitchen big enough for a restaurant, and a nursery that still looked like a dream even after the dream cracked. For years ago, when Grant's son Eli was born, Grant thought he had finally won life, because the baby's first cry felt like proof that all his hard work meant something real, something warm, something that could love him back, and for a while it did. Eli had been the kind of toddler who laughed with his whole body, the kind who ran like his legs were powered by joy, the kind who would tug Grant's expensive suit jacket with sticky fingers and say, "Up, Daddy," like the world was simple and safe. Then a bright afternoon turned into a dark memory Grant replayed so many times he could taste it. They had been coming back from a doctor checkup. Nothing scary, nothing urgent, just a normal day, and Grant had been on the phone like he always was, and the driver had paused at a green light because something felt wrong, and that half-second saved Grant's life. But it didn't save Eli's. A car burst through the intersection. Too fast, too careless, like rules didn't apply, and even though the impact didn't crush the whole vehicle, it hit the side where Eli's little seat was, and the sound that followed wasn't just metal, it was the sound of Grant's control breaking. Eli survived, but survived is a hard word when you learn your child won't stand the way he used to. The doctors used careful voices, the way adults do when they think careful voices can soften pain, and they explained that Eli's spine had been damaged, that his legs were not getting the right signals, that nobody could promise a full recovery, and Grant sat there with his hands folded so tight his knuckles looked like chalk, trying to negotiate with reality the way he negotiated with business. But reality did not care how rich he was. After that, the mansion filled up with people who came to help. Therapists, nurses, specialists, assistants, and maids to clean the parts of life Grant had no energy to clean. And at first, Grant welcomed them, because he thought help meant progress. But then he started noticing small things, tiny cuts that nobody could explain, bruises that didn't match any normal bump, a nurse who spoke to Eli like he was a problem instead of a child, a therapist who ended sessions early when she thought Grant was busy, a maid who yanked Eli's wheelchair too roughly as if he were luggage. None of it was the kind of harm that makes headlines, but it was the kind that makes a small child go quiet, the kind that makes a little boy stare at the floor and stop asking for up. And that is when Grant's fear grew teeth. He didn't tell anyone at first because powerful men hate admitting they are scared, but he started installing cameras. Tiny ones hidden in smoke detectors and clock frames, behind decorative plants, inside a harmless-looking lamp in the living room, even a pinhole lens tucked high in the corner of the nursery, aimed at the bed and the wheelchair. He told himself, "I'm not spying, I'm safeguarding," because the word spying sounded ugly and the word safeguarding sounded like love. He made one rule that felt like safety. No one would ever be alone with Eli in a blind spot again, and another rule, the rule he never said out loud. Nobody would ever take something from him again. The cameras fed into a private system only Grant could access, protected by passwords and codes that changed every week. And for a while he watched the screens the way a man watches the weather during a storm. Every hour, every day, searching for the next strike. Then something happened that surprised him. He caught people being careless, yes, but he also caught Eli crying when he thought nobody heard, caught his son staring at his own legs like they belonged to someone else, caught himself missing moments because he was watching them through glass instead of living them, and it hurt so much that Grant started looking less. Not because he trusted people, but because every glance at the feed reminded him of what he couldn't fix. He kept the cameras anyway because removing them felt like walking into the dark without a flashlight. Time moved on, but the house never felt normal again. Eli was 4 now, small for his age, with soft hair that curled at the ends and big eyes that noticed everything adults tried to hide. He used a custom wheelchair built for his size with straps to keep him steady, and a footrest he sometimes stared at like it was a punishment. Some days he was bright, asking simple questions like, "Daddy, can I run again?" And Grant would swallow hard and say, "We're working on it, buddy," because telling your child, "I don't know," feels like failing. Other days Eli would sit quietly with toy cars on his lap, pushing them across his blanket as if the cars could travel where he couldn't. Grant tried to fill the gaps with gifts, tablets, toys, a small indoor play area designed for wheelchair access. But the truth was Eli didn't need more stuff, he needed more peace, and peace was the one thing Grant couldn't buy because peace requires trust, and trust was the one thing Grant didn't have. The old maid quit on a Tuesday without warning, leaving a short note that said she couldn't handle the sadness, and Grant didn't even blame her because the sadness in that house was heavy. He hired a new maid through an agency that promised discretion and experience, and that is how Tessa arrived. She wasn't loud, she wasn't overly cheerful. She didn't do that fake thing some people do around rich people where they smiled too hard. She was in her late 20s, plain clothes, simple posture, eyes that didn't dart around the mansion like she was counting the price of everything. During the interview, Grant asked the usual questions: experience, references, schedule, and she answered with calm, short sentences, never trying to impress him. And then she asked him one question that felt strange and gentle at the same time. What sound makes him feel safe? Grant blinked because nobody had asked him that, not the doctors, not the therapists, not the expensive experts. He said, "He likes music," and she nodded like that mattered more than the size of the house. He hired her because he was tired and because her calm didn't irritate him, and also because something in her question made him feel like she saw Eli as a child, not a task. The first few days were quiet. Tessa cleaned without drama, cooked simple meals, and followed Eli's schedule with the kind of steady attention Grant wished he could give but never had the time for. She spoke softly to Eli, not baby talk, not harsh adult talk, just normal, as if his wheelchair didn't change who he was. And Eli, who usually ignored new staff, watched her the way he watched cartoons. Focused, curious. One morning, Grant passed the playroom and heard a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. Eli giggling, not a polite laugh. A real giggle that spilled out of him like it couldn't be held back. Grant paused, almost afraid to look because hope can hurt when it gets crushed. He peeked in and saw Tessa on the floor with a bowl of plastic spoons, tapping them lightly like drums, letting Eli copy her rhythm with 2 spoons of his own. It wasn't therapy, it wasn't a lesson, it was just a game, and Eli's shoulders looked less tense. Grant felt something move in his chest, something close to relief, and then he felt something else right after. Suspicion, because relief was dangerous. The next day, he noticed Eli asking for Tessa when she left the room, and that made Grant's jaw tighten, because even love can feel like a threat when you're terrified of losing. Grant told himself to be grateful. He told himself not to control this. He told himself he was being paranoid, but paranoia is just fear wearing armor, and Grant had plenty of armor. On the 5th day, a small problem happened that turned into a big one. Eli's favorite toy, an old stuffed dog with 1 floppy ear, went missing. It was not expensive. It was not important to adults. It was everything to Eli. The boy's face crumpled, and he searched his bed and the chair in the playroom, and when he couldn't find it, he started crying in a way that sounded too old for a 4-year-old, the kind of cry that says, "Things keep leaving me." Grant snapped at the staff, demanded they search every room, and when nobody found it, he felt that familiar panic rising, the panic that always came before anger. Tessa didn't argue. She simply asked Eli, "Where did you last hug him?" And Eli sniffed and said, "In Daddy's office," because Grant had let him sit there once and help with paperwork. Grant froze. His office was a no-child zone full of sharp corners, tech, and secrets. He marched to his office, opened the door, and there it was, the stuffed dog sitting neatly on his couch like it had been placed there on purpose. Grant stared at it, and his mind instantly went somewhere dark. Somebody had taken it from Eli and planted it here to make the boy look careless. The idea made no sense, but fear doesn't need sense. It needs targets. Grant looked at Tessa and asked, "Did you put this here?" And her face didn't change, but her eyes sharpened a little, like she was choosing her words carefully. "No," she said, then added, "But someone wanted you to find it here." Grant's stomach tightened. "What do you mean someone wanted me to?" And then Eli's little voice cut through the tension with a soft, confused question. "Daddy, why is my dog in your secret room?" Secret room. Grant's heart gave a hard thump. Eli was 4. He wasn't supposed to know anything about secret rooms. Grant forced a smile and said, "It's not secret, buddy." But Eli shook his head and pointed toward the wall where the bookshelf stood. The bookshelf that hid the door to a small storage space Grant used for private documents and backups. Eli pointed like he had seen it open before. Grant's throat went dry. Tessa stood very still, watching Grant more than she watched Eli. Grant crouched by his son and asked gently, "Who showed you that, Eli?" And Eli, with the innocent honesty only little kids have, said, "The other lady." She said, "Don't tell your dad. It's our game." The other lady. Grant's mind flashed to the old maid who quit, then to a blur of caregivers over the past year. Grant forced his voice to stay calm, but inside he was boiling. "What did she do in there?" he asked. Eli shrugged and said, "She hid stuff. She said Daddy is watching." Grant felt ice slide down his spine. Daddy is watching. Whoever this was, they knew about the cameras, or at least suspected. Grant stood up slowly and told Eli, "Go with Tessa for a snack." And Eli obeyed, wiping his cheeks. When the door closed, Grant turned to his security panel, fingers moving fast, pulling up footage from weeks ago, searching for any movement near that hidden door. He didn't find anything clear at first, just normal cleaning, normal walking, normal life. Then his eyes caught a moment. The old maid standing in the hallway looking up toward the exact corner where Grant knew a camera lens was hidden. The maid smiled, small, smug, and then lifted a finger to her lips like she was shushing someone. Grant's mouth went dry because she wasn't shushing the camera. She was shushing him. Grant felt rage, but underneath it was a deeper fear. If someone could play with him in his own house, what else could they do to Eli? That night, Grant locked his office, doubled the codes, and told himself he would watch the feeds more carefully again. He told himself he would be present. He told himself he would not let guilt soften his instincts. The next morning, the agency called and said they were still investigating the old maid's sudden resignation. It sounded like empty words. Grant ended the call and walked into the kitchen to find Tessa humming softly while flipping pancakes shaped like stars. Eli sat at the table, smiling, tapping his spoon in a rhythm that matched her humming. Grant watched them for a moment, and in that moment he hated himself for feeling suspicious of the only person making his child smile. But suspicion isn't a switch you flip off, it's a habit you feed. Later that day, Grant returned early from a meeting because a strange message hit his phone, a security alert from inside the house. Not a door alarm, not a window alarm, an internal alert from a sensor only linked to one area, the hallway near the locked fingerprint door. Grant's fingers turned cold as he parked and hurried inside. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. He called out, "Eli?" No answer. "Tessa?" No answer. Then he heard it, a soft sound like wheels rolling across tile, but it wasn't in the open rooms, it was down the hall. Grant moved fast, shoes silent on the polished floor, and he saw the fingerprint door slightly ajar, not wide open, just open enough to look wrong. Grant's heart pounded. That door was never ajar. He pushed it, and the small space behind it wasn't empty. It was lit by a single light, and inside were stacked boxes Grant didn't recognize, and on one box was a symbol drawn in thick black marker. A simple shape like an eye. Grant's breath caught. Then, from deeper inside, he heard Eli's small voice, shaky and confused. "Tessa? I don't like this game." Grant lunged forward, panic flooding him, and that is when he saw them through the narrow opening to the deeper passage. Tessa kneeling with Eli wrapped tight in a blanket, her face close to his, speaking low, while her other hand held something thin and metallic that caught the light for a second like a sharp line, and Eli's fingers were gripping her sleeve like he was afraid, and Grant's mind screamed one thought louder than all others. She's hurting him. Grant's vision blurred with rage. He shoved the door wider and roared, "Step away from my son." And Tessa's head snapped up, eyes wide, not guilty wide but startled wide like someone caught in the middle of stopping something, not starting it. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, another sound hit the hallway behind Grant, fast footsteps, heavier than Tessa's, and a man's voice barking, "Move now." And Grant whipped around just in time to see a stranger in dark clothes storming toward them like he belonged there, and in the same second Eli screamed, and Tessa yanked the blanket tighter and shouted, "Mr. Mercer, don't." But it was too late because the stranger reached into his jacket, and the camera alert on Grant's phone pinged again like a warning bell, and the scene on the monitor in Grant's office was now happening in real life right in front of him. The chapter ends right here, with Grant trapped between his son's scream, a stranger closing in, and a maid who looks like she knows exactly what's about to happen next. And if you want to find out why Tessa took Eli into that locked hallway and who that man really is, Grant didn't move at first because his body was doing two opposite things at once. charging forward like a furious father and freezing like a man who has finally met the nightmare he has been feeding for years. And that split second was enough for the stranger's heavy footsteps to reach the edge of the hallway light, not rushing in like a thief but stepping in with the stiff confidence of someone who had been in that house before. The man was mid-30s, clean-cut, dressed too neatly for a burglar and too urgently for a guest, and when his hand slid into his jacket it didn't pull out a weapon, it pulled out a thin black folder and a small silver keycard that flashed under the light, the exact metallic line Grant had thought was danger, and the man barked, "Grant, listen to me, don't let him see that." Like the real emergency was not Eli's wheelchair or Tessa's arms, but the boxes stacked behind the fingerprint door with that eye symbol drawn on top. Eli's little scream turned into a frightened whimper as Tessa tightened the blanket around him and angled her body so the child's face was pressed against her shoulder instead of the hallway, and she said quickly, "Eli, look at me, baby, breathe with me, one. Good, you're safe." The same calm rhythm she used when she cooked, the same calm rhythm that made Eli relax, and Grant's heart stumbled because it sounded like love, not a scheme. He snapped his eyes to the stranger and growled, "Who are you and why are you in my house?" And the man lifted his hands in surrender, folder in one hand, keycard in the other, voice shaking with the kind of pressure that comes from knowing the next minute could ruin somebody's life. "My name is Colin Pierce. I'm your attorney's investigator. You hired our firm after the accident. You don't remember me because you were half dead inside and you kept firing people the moment they made you feel weak." And the words hit Grant like a slap because they were painfully close to true. Grant's gaze whipped to Tessa, and she didn't look guilty. She looked tired, like she had been carrying a secret so heavy it had pressed her shoulders down, and she said, "Mr. Mercer, I didn't take him to scare him. I took him because you were about to lose him in a different way and you didn't even know it." And Grant's voice cracked with rage and fear. "Lose him how?" And Tessa swallowed, eyes shining, then nodded toward the boxes. "Those boxes are not yours." And before Grant could answer, Colin stepped closer, careful not to spook Eli, and said, "Grant, someone has been using your own security system against you, moving things, planting things, making your son say words you never taught him, pushing you until you don't trust anyone because an isolated man is easier to control." And Grant's breath turned sharp because the missing stuffed dog, the secret room comment, the old maid staring at the camera, every detail lined up like teeth on a zipper. He took a half step forward and demanded, "Who?" And Colin's jaw tightened. "Your business partner, Wade Lang." And it felt impossible because Wade Lang was more than a partner. He was a brother in suits, the man who stood beside Grant at press conferences, who held Grant up when the accident happened, who sat in hospital chairs and promised, "I've got your back, focus on your boy." The man Grant trusted with passwords, signatures, and decisions when grief made thinking feel like lifting bricks. Grant's mouth went dry as he whispered, "No," and Colin answered softly, "Yes." Then opened the folder, not to show papers in court language, but to show photos and printed screenshots. Wade's car parked behind the mansion gate on nights Grant was out of town, Wade's hand on the keypad panel in the staff corridor, Wade speaking to the old maid in the driveway with his back turned to the cameras, and at the bottom of one page, a close-up of that black eye symbol on a box, captioned in plain text, "Storage unit label used by Lang Logistics." And Grant's fingers curled into fists so tight his nails bit his palms. He turned toward the fingerprint door again, toward the boxes that suddenly felt like a parasite living inside his home, and his mind tried to reject it because betrayal hurts worse than any enemy. It hurts because it uses your own trust as a knife. Eli made a small sound, a babyish "daddy," like he could feel the cold change in Grant's body, and Grant forced himself to look at his son, to see the 4-year-old face peeking above the blanket, cheeks wet, eyes wide, legs still and small beneath the fabric. And regret punched him because in that moment he realized he had been so busy trying to control danger that he had not been truly present for the child who needed him most. He lowered his voice, "Eli, sweetheart, it's okay, Daddy's here." But the words sounded thin even to him because Daddy being here meant nothing if Daddy's mind was always somewhere else. Tessa rubbed Eli's back and Eli clung to her like she was a lifeboat, and that made Grant's jealousy flare, then fade, because jealousy was selfish and this was his son's comfort, and comfort was rare in that house. Grant looked at Tessa again and asked, slower now, "Why are you involved in this?" And Tessa hesitated, then said, "Because Wade tried to hire me first." And Grant's eyes narrowed, "What?" And she nodded, voice steady but painful. "I applied through the agency. The agency sent my file to more than one client. Wade called me for a private interview, and offered me double money to work here, but not for you, for him. He said I would watch the child, and report what I see. I said no. He laughed and told me I'd be back when I needed the money, and Grant felt his stomach drop because it sounded exactly like Wade. Smooth, charming, sure that people can be purchased. Tessa went on. When I came here and saw the cameras, I knew why he wanted someone inside. He wasn't scared for your son. He was scared of what your son could cost him. And Grant's mind raced. Cost him how? And then Colin answered the question Grant didn't say out loud. Wade has been using your grief to move ownership around. There are documents being filed under your name that you did not personally sign. There are accounts created under your son's identity. And there is a new trust agreement that quietly shifts control of your company if you are deemed unfit due to emotional distress. And the words unfit made Grant see red because after the accident people had whispered things about him behind polite smiles. Too intense, too angry, too unstable, while he was just a father trying not to drown. Grant stepped closer to Colin, voice low. You're telling me Wade has been building a case that I'm losing my mind? And Colin nodded. Yes, and he's using the house staff to feed that story. You explode, you fire people, you become the difficult grieving billionaire, and he becomes the calm hero who steps in, and Grant's throat tightened because it sounded like a movie plot until he remembered that real life is often crueler than fiction. Grant turned toward the boxes and said, open them, and Colin hesitated. We can't, but Tessa cut in, we can if we do it the right way. And she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small memory card in a clear plastic sleeve, the kind used in tiny cameras, and she said, this is why I brought Eli here. Wade hid the real recordings inside the old security hub behind this door. He swapped some feeds. He made sure you saw what he wanted you to see, and you stopped trusting your own instincts because everything looked almost normal, and Grant's chest went tight with a sick realization. He thought he had eyes everywhere, but someone had been standing behind his eyes, guiding where he looked. He whispered, how did you get that? And Tessa answered, because you stopped watching, and he assumed no one else would. And there was no arrogance in her voice, only urgency. I heard the clicking behind the wall panel when I cleaned. I saw the dust pattern like something had been opened recently. I waited until Eli was asleep and I checked. The hub was not the same model listed on your invoice. Someone replaced it, and Grant stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time, not a maid, not staff, but a person with sharp attention and courage. He swallowed. So you took my son into this hallway because, and Tessa said, because Wade was coming today, and Grant froze. How do you know? And Colin lifted his phone, screen showing a message timestamped that morning. Lang scheduled on-site walkthrough for 30 p.m. to help with security audit, and Grant's stomach twisted as he looked at the clock in his mind, realizing he had come home early only because of an alert, and the alert may have been the only honest thing left in his system. Tessa tightened her hold on Eli and said, Eli found the door once when the old maid was playing that secret game. Wade promised him candy if he stayed quiet. When a child is lonely, they will do anything for attention, and the line cut Grant deeply because it was true. Grant had been buying toys, not giving time. Eli sniffed and whispered, candy, like a small confession, and Grant's face softened with pain. Eli, did someone give you candy and tell you to hide things? And Eli nodded a little, eyes down. He said Daddy watches. He said Daddy gets mad. He said, if I'm good, Daddy won't leave, and that sentence landed like a brick because it exposed the deepest wound in the house. Eli had connected disability with abandonment, and somewhere in that connection was Grant's absence. Grant's voice went rough. Who said Daddy would leave? And Eli whispered, Wade, and Grant's hands shook, not with anger now but with grief because Wade had used his child's fear as a tool. Colin spoke quietly, Grant, we need to secure evidence before Wade arrives. If he realizes we know, he will erase everything and claim you're paranoid. And Grant nodded stiffly, then turned to the fingerprint door, his own lock, and placed his thumb on the scanner. It beeped green. The door opened fully, cold air rolled out like the breath of a hidden room, and the first thing Grant saw was not gold or cash or anything dramatic. It was paperwork, stacks of folders, hard drives, duplicate keys, a small portable router blinking blue, and a binder labeled in neat print, Mercer Estate, Contingency, and that label made Grant's skin crawl. He reached for it, but Tessa stopped him with one word, gloves, and she tossed him a pair from a cleaning caddy she had dragged near the door earlier, which proved she had planned this moment more than Grant had. He slipped the gloves on, opened the binder carefully, and inside were copies of documents that looked like normal legal language until you understood what they did. Guardianship drafts, medical competency forms, company control clauses, and at the center, a page with a bold heading, Emergency Petition, Temporary Control Transfer, with Wade Lang's signature on the attorney line, and Grant's name typed under Petitioner, as if Grant himself was asking a court to hand Wade his life. Grant's mind flashed back to nights he signed papers half asleep, to days he nodded at Wade's just routine folders while Eli cried down the hallway, and regret came so sharp it almost made him gag. He whispered, "I was careless." And the words tasted like poison because Grant Mercer never said that about himself, not in business, not in life, but fatherhood had proven that control is not the same as care. Colin leaned in, voice firm. "Grant, don't blame yourself yet. That comes later. Right now we do this correctly," and he pulled out evidence bags and started photographing everything with timestamps, while Tessa held Eli close, turning his head away from the mess so he wouldn't see the ugly adult world he had been dragged into. Grant looked at the hard drives and asked, "What's on those?" And Tessa answered, "Your house, but not the version you think," and she slid the tiny memory card into Colin's reader. The screen loaded a video and Grant's stomach turned as he watched footage from the playroom he thought he knew. Wade sitting on the couch with Eli on his lap, smiling too brightly, voice sweet like syrup. "Your daddy gets angry because he's sad. You know how to help daddy? You tell me when the maid goes into the office. You tell me when daddy watches the screens." And little Eli, younger in the footage, nodding because children nod when adults sound kind, and then Wade's smile fading just a little as he added, "If you do this, I'll make sure daddy doesn't send you away." And Grant's chest tightened so hard he had to turn his face away for a second, because the worst pain is watching someone hurt your child while you were in the next room thinking you were protecting him. The next clip showed the old maid receiving an envelope in the driveway from Wade, her face blank, then later that same maid yanking Eli's wheelchair too fast, not enough to bruise him but enough to make him scared. Then another clip showed a nurse being told quietly by Wade, "If he explodes again, call me," and the nurse nodding. Grant's hands trembled as he watched his own life turned into a trap. He whispered, he was building a file, and Colin nodded, "Yes. A story," and Tessa said, "A story you almost helped him finish by pushing everyone away," and that sentence stung because it was true. Grant's jaw flexed, eyes burning, and he looked at Eli, his 4-year-old son with paralyzed legs and a heart that still wanted to believe adults, and Grant realized something that scared him more than any betrayal. The real danger wasn't cameras or staff or Wade. It was the way Grant's fear had made his child feel unsafe in his own home. He crouched close to Tessa and Eli, voice low and gentle. "Eli, I'm sorry. Daddy is not leaving you. Not ever. And nobody gets to play secret games with you again." And Eli blinked up at him like he wanted to believe it but didn't know how. Tessa shifted slightly so Eli could see Grant's face and she said softly, "Tell him something only you would know." And Grant hesitated, then swallowed and whispered, "When you were a baby, you used to fall asleep when I tapped your back exactly 3 times, then I'd hum that silly song about the blue truck. You always smiled even with a pacifier." And Eli's eyes widened a little, recognition flickering because even a small child remembers safety. He whispered, "Blue truck." And Grant nodded, tears threatening. "Yeah, buddy. Blue truck." And in that moment, the mansion didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a place where one father had been failing quietly and didn't want to fail anymore. Colin's phone buzzed and he looked at it, face tightening. "He's at the gate." And Grant stood slowly, fear returning but now mixed with something stronger, clarity. "Wade," Grant said, the name heavy with betrayal, and he looked at Tessa. "Take Eli to the kitchen. Put on his cartoon. Keep him calm." And Tessa nodded, but her eyes searched Grant's face. "You can't confront Wade alone." And Grant answered, "I won't," then looked at Colin. "You're recording everything." And Colin lifted a small body cam, already running, and Grant turned off the hallway light, leaving the hidden room dim like a secret that was about to be dragged into daylight. They moved quickly, Colin securing the binder and drives, Grant closing the fingerprint door and wiping it clean, Tessa rolling Eli away with gentle hands, whispering a counting game so the child's breathing stayed even. As Eli disappeared down the hall, Grant heard the front door chime, the sound that usually meant business associates and polite smiles, and today it sounded like a warning bell. Wade's voice carried through the foyer, cheerful and loud. "Grant. Thought I'd swing by, check on you and the little guy." And Grant walked into the living room with his face set like stone, because the hardest thing in betrayal is having to look normal while your heart is screaming. Wade entered with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the place, suit perfect, hair perfect, expression warm, and behind him was a gift bag with a bright cartoon character on it like proof of kindness. "You got my message," Wade said, spreading his arms. "Security. Audit day, right? After everything, I just want you safe." And Grant forced a small nod. "Appreciate it." And Wade stepped closer, lowering his voice into the tone men use when they pretend to be concerned. "How are you holding up? You seemed tense lately. People are talking," and there it was, the bait. Press Grant's weak spot, make him snap, add another clip to the unfit story. Grant held his temper, voice flat. "People will always talk." And Wade smiled, a quick flash of relief, then glanced past Grant toward the hallway like his eyes were checking whether doors were where he left them. "Where's Eli?" he asked too casually, and Grant watched him, noticing details he had ignored for years. Wade's gaze didn't soften when he said the child's name. His hands didn't relax, his smile didn't reach his eyes. Grant answered, "Resting?" and Wade nodded, then tapped the gift bag. "I brought him something," and Grant didn't take it. "Later?" and Wade's smile tightened for half a second before returning. "Sure," he said, then slid into the subject he really came for. "Grant, I've been worried about you. Your board is worried. If you need a break, I can handle things for a while. Just until you're steady." And Grant felt the old trap closing, the offer that sounds like help but is really a takeover. He looked Wade dead in the eye and said, "Funny you mention handling things," and Wade's brows lifted. "Yeah?" and Grant's voice stayed calm, dangerously calm, "because I've been reviewing some files," and Wade's face didn't change, but a flicker of alertness passed through his eyes. "Files?" Wade chuckled. "You always did love paperwork," and Grant took one slow step closer. "I love my son more," and Wade's smile froze for a breath, the first crack in the mask. Grant continued, "Tell me, Wade, how long have you been using my house as your office?" and Wade laughed again too loud. "What are you talking about?" and Grant leaned in just enough to make it uncomfortable. "The boxes behind my fingerprint door. The swapped security hub. The staff you paid. The candy you used to buy my child's silence." And Wade's face finally changed, just a little, because some accusations are too specific to be guessed. Wade's lips parted as if to deny, but his eyes darted toward the hallway again, calculating, and Grant saw it clearly. This man wasn't shocked. He was adjusting. Wade recovered fast, voice smooth. "Grant, you're spiraling. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're seeing conspiracies." And Grant almost laughed because Wade had just proven the plan out loud. "Label Grant unstable, step in as savior." Grant nodded slowly. "That's what you were afraid of? Or were you afraid I'd stop being careless?" And the word careless made Wade stiffen, because Wade's entire strategy depended on Grant being distracted, grieving, absent. Grant took a breath, and for a second his mind flashed to the day of the accident. The phone in his hand, his eyes on an email, his driver asking, "Should I take the long route?" and Grant saying, "No, take the fast one, I can't be late." And the cruel truth was this: Wade didn't need to cause the accident to break Grant. Grant's own priorities had already cracked the foundation, and Wade had simply stepped into the crack and widened it. Grant swallowed the guilt and kept going, because guilt can't protect a child, action can. "You're right," Grant said softly, and Wade's eyes sharpened because he heard a shift. "I was spiraling. I was absent. I thought cameras would replace presence." And Wade's shoulders eased, thinking he had won, thinking Grant was confessing weakness, but then Grant's voice hardened. "But I'm here now," and Wade's smile returned. "Good. Then let me help you," and Grant cut him off. "No. You're done," and Wade's eyes flickered, a flash of annoyance. "Grant, listen," and Grant raised his hand. "Colin," and Wade's head snapped slightly, confused, and from the side room Colin stepped out like a shadow becoming real, holding a folder and a small camera light blinking, and Wade's face lost color because he recognized Colin Pierce instantly, the kind of man who never appears unless the ground beneath you is cracking. Wade's voice dropped. "What is this?" and Colin said calmly, "Evidence," and Wade's jaw tightened. "This is harassment." And Grant watched Wade's mask try to rebuild itself, watched him switch tactics from friendly to offended. "Grant, I've stood by you. I kept your company afloat. I visited your son." And Grant's eyes burned. "You visited my son to train him to fear me?" And that was the moment Wade's smile died completely. Wade's face went cold and flat, the real face behind the charm. "You can't prove that," he said quietly, and Grant answered, "Try me?" And Wade scoffed, stepping back, lifting his hands like he was the victim. "This is insane. You're going to regret this." "The board?" and Grant said, "The board will see what you did," and Wade's eyes narrowed. "You think they'll believe a maid over me?" And Grant's heart kicked because Wade had just revealed his next target. Tessa. Discredit her, crush her, erase her. Grant's voice turned lethal. "Leave her out of your mouth," and Wade smirked. "Why?" "Because she makes your kid laugh and now you think she's some kind of saint?" And Grant's mind flashed to Eli clinging to Tessa, to the way his child breathed easier with her counting, and Grant realized Wade was right about one thing. Tessa did matter because she had done what Grant hadn't. She had been present. Grant stepped forward, not to hit Wade, not to threaten violence, but to deliver the truth that would hurt him the most. "She treated my son like a human being while you treated him like leverage," and Wade's nostrils flared, anger slipping out. "I treated him like reality. You built an empire and then you let a moment of carelessness ruin your heir. You were never built for softness, Grant. You were built for control." And the words sliced because they hit the bruise Grant hid from himself. Wade was saying what Grant feared, that the accident was not just bad luck, It was a consequence of Grant's priorities. Grant's voice dropped to a whisper. You're right about one thing. I wasn't built for softness. Then he lifted his head, eyes steady. I'm choosing it anyway. And Wade stared like he didn't recognize him because predators only understand patterns and Grant had just changed his. Wade shifted his weight, calculating an exit, eyes scanning the room like he was searching for the one thing he could still use, and then his gaze landed on the gift bag and his mouth curled. Fine, he said. Keep your little story. But you'll lose everything else. And he reached into his inside pocket, not for a weapon, not for anything violent, but for a simple phone, thumb already moving fast and Colin's eyes widened. He's triggering a remote wipe. And Grant's stomach dropped. Wade was erasing the hidden hub, the drives, the swapped feeds, trying to make the evidence vanish before it could breathe. Grant lunged not to attack Wade but to snatch the phone, but Wade stepped back just out of reach, smiling thinly. Too late, and at that exact second the house lights flickered, just once, like the mansion itself blinked, and somewhere down the hallway a small alarm chirped softly, and Grant realized Wade wasn't just wiping evidence, he was cutting power to the system that protected the locks. Meaning the hidden door and the cameras were about to go blind, meaning the one safety net Grant trusted was about to disappear again. Grant's throat tightened as he heard, faint but clear from the kitchen, Eli calling out in a small scared voice, Daddy? And Grant's heart broke open because he finally understood the true cost of all of it. The betrayal was ugly, but the real tragedy was the fear his child had learned in a house that should have been safe. Grant stared at Wade's phone, saw the progress bar sliding across the screen like a countdown, and he made a decision that would change everything. He turned away from Wade, turned away from the evidence, turned away from the empire, and ran toward his son. Because if he had to choose between winning a fight and being the father Eli needed in that moment, he would choose Eli. And as Grant sprinted down the hall, the mansion's security monitors went dark one by one behind him like dying stars. And the last thing he heard before he reached the kitchen was Wade's voice calling after him with cold certainty, You just proved you're unfit. And Grant burst into the kitchen to find Eli trembling in his wheelchair, Tessa kneeling beside him with her hands on his little shoulders, whispering, Stay with me, baby, stay with me. And Grant dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around his son so tight he could feel the boy's heartbeat, and Eli sobbed into his chest, Don't leave. And Grant whispered into his hair, voice shaking with regret and love, I'm here. I'm here. I'm sorry, not the kind of sorry that is polite, but the kind that is a promise. And behind them Tessa looked up at Grant with tears in her eyes and said the sentence that made Grant's stomach fall through the floor. Mr. Mercer. Wade isn't wiping the footage to hide the staff abuse, she whispered. He's wiping it because the last video on that hub shows who really caused the crash. And Grant's blood ran cold as the lights flickered again, the house settling into darkness, and Grant realized the most painful twist wasn't that Wade betrayed him. It was that the truth about the day Eli's legs stopped working had been sitting inside Grant's own walls this whole time, waiting for him to finally look. Grant's arms stayed locked around Eli like his body finally understood what his money never could, and for a few seconds the kitchen stopped being a mansion kitchen and became a small safe world made of one father's heartbeat and one child's wet breaths. Because Eli's cry wasn't loud the way tantrums are loud, it was thin and shaking, the kind of cry that sounds like a child trying to hold in fear because he thinks fear is bad. And that broke Grant in a way no boardroom ever had. Daddy? Don't go, Eli whispered, and Grant pressed his cheek against the top of his son's head and said the words he should have said. Said every single day since the accident, I'm not going anywhere, I'm right here, I'm staying, and he meant it so hard it hurt, because he finally saw the truth hiding behind the cameras and locks. Eli didn't need more protection from strangers, he needed protection from loneliness, from silence, from the feeling that he had to earn attention by being easy. Tessa stayed close, one hand still on Eli's shoulder, the other braced on the floor because she looked like she'd been holding herself steady for hours, and when Grant lifted his head to meet her eyes, he didn't see an employee's fear, he saw a person who had taken a risk that could ruin her life just to keep a little boy from being used again. Tell me, Grant said, voice low and rough, tell me what you meant. And Tessa swallowed like she was about to step into a storm. Mr. Mercer, Wade didn't just set up that hub to watch your staff, she said. He set it up to own your story, and the last video on it is the one thing he can't let you see because it shows the day of the crash in a way you never saw it before. And Grant's stomach twisted so hard he felt sick, because the crash was the one moment his mind always tried to control and could never fix. The memory hit him in sharp pieces. The green light, the phone screen in his hand, his driver asking a question he barely heard, Eli's baby laugh in the back seat, then the sudden impact like the world being slammed shut. And Grant had spent years blaming a reckless driver, blaming fate, blaming bad luck, blaming everyone except the one person he could not forgive without admitting the truth. Himself. How could there be a video of that? Grant demanded, because it didn't make sense, and Tessa's voice stayed calm but urgent. Because Wade has been saving everything that can control you, she said, and Colin stepped into the kitchen doorway, face tight. Grant, we have a window of minutes before the wipe completes, he said, and before Wade starts telling a new story about what just happened. And the way Colin said story made Grant's chest burn, because he suddenly understood that Wade didn't just steal money or documents, he tried to steal the meaning of Grant's life, turn a grieving father into an unstable villain and turn himself into the rescuer. Grant looked down at Eli, who was watching the adults with big scared eyes, and Grant forced his voice into a gentle tone. Buddy, can you watch your cartoon for a minute while Daddy talks? And Eli clung tighter. No, he whispered, and Grant didn't argue. He just changed the promise into something a 4-year-old could hold. Okay, then you stay with me right here. And nobody will take you. And Eli nodded, still trembling, and Tessa reached for the remote and turned on the TV at low volume. A bright, silly show that felt almost wrong next to the fear in the room, but it gave Eli something to stare at while his fingers stayed wrapped around Grant's shirt. Grant turned to Colin. What do we do? And Colin answered fast. We need proof that survives the wipe, and we need to secure the chain of custody. And Tessa cut in. I already pulled the most important parts, and she reached under the kitchen sink cabinet and slid out a small sealed plastic bag, the kind used for keeping water away from electronics, and inside it was another tiny memory card, and Grant stared at it like it was a key to a locked part of his life. Colin's eyes widened. You copied it? And Tessa nodded. I copied what I could before today, she said, because I knew he would try to erase it the moment he realized you were close. And Grant's voice broke. Close to what? And Tessa hesitated, then said the words slowly so Eli wouldn't catch the full weight. Close to the truth about why that intersection was even on your route. And Grant went cold because he had always assumed the route was random, an unlucky moment on a normal road. Colin moved closer and lowered his voice. Grant, listen to me carefully, he said. If that video shows intentional misconduct by Wade or anyone tied to him, this becomes criminal, and he will not behave like a polite businessman. Anymore, he will behave like a man who thinks he is about to lose everything. And Grant's jaw tightened. He already tried to take everything, and Colin nodded. Yes, but now you're threatening his freedom, and that word, freedom, made Grant's hands shake because it meant the crash might not have been an accident at all. Grant stared at the memory card, then at Eli's small hands, then at Tessa, and his mind flashed to every moment he had been careless, not just in a business sense but as a father. The calls he took at dinner, the meetings he chose over bedtime, the way he tried to fix pain with money instead of time, and he felt a wave of regret so heavy it almost pushed him to his knees. I should have been looking, he whispered, and Tessa didn't scold him, she just said, be here now, like that was the only part he could still change. Colin pulled out a laptop from his bag, hands moving quick and practiced. We watch it, we verify it, and we immediately move to secure it legally, he said, and Grant nodded, then looked down at Eli. Eli, sweetheart, he said softly, I need you to keep watching the cartoon, okay? Daddy's going to listen to something. And Eli's eyes darted to the laptop, then back to Grant. Bad man, he whispered, and Grant swallowed. Yes, he admitted, but Daddy's not scared anymore, and it wasn't fully true, but it was the truth he wanted to become. Colin slid the memory card into a reader, the laptop screen flickered, and a folder opened with dates and short labels, and Tessa pointed to one file. That one, she said, and the label made Grant's throat tighten because it wasn't dramatic, it was plain, route change _call. Colin clicked it and a grainy video started, not from a street camera like Grant expected, but from inside a vehicle, dashcam footage, showing the front road and a small reflection of the driver's hands on the wheel. That's your old car, Colin said quietly, and Grant's eyes locked onto the scene as if his body had been waiting years for it. The timestamp was 3 years ago, the day everything broke, and the sound came through next, Grant's own voice. Faint, sharp, distracted, talking on a phone call, and then the driver's voice, steady and respectful. Sir, traffic is heavy on the usual route. Do you want me to take the long way? And in the reflection, Grant could see himself in the passenger seat, head bent toward a glowing phone screen, not looking up, not thinking. His own recorded answer cut him like a knife. No, take the faster one. I can't be late. And the driver said, yes, sir. And the car turned onto a road Grant now recognized with sick clarity, the road that led to the intersection. Grant's chest tightened. That's not, he started. But the video continued and a phone notification sound dinged from the driver's side, and the driver glanced at a second phone mounted low near the console. And Grant's stomach dropped because he had never known there was a second phone. On that second phone screen, a message popped up, clear enough to read even in the grain. Now. Take Oak Ridge. Trust me. And under that text was a contact name that made Grant's blood run cold. Wade. Grant's ears rang, and for a second he couldn't breathe because the video didn't show Wade behind the wheel. It showed Wade reaching into Grant's life through the one person Grant never questioned. His own driver. No, Grant whispered as if saying it could undo it, but the clip kept going and the driver's hands tightened on the wheel, hesitating, and he said softly, almost to himself. He said now, and then he cleared his throat and asked Grant, "Sir, there's another route that might be faster." And Grant, still on his call, replied without looking up, "Do it?" And that single careless word, "do it," felt like Grant handing a stranger the keys to his child's legs. The camera view shook slightly as they turned, and then minutes later the intersection appeared ahead, a green light, then a blur of a speeding car slicing through as if the red light didn't exist, and the impact slammed into the side, the dashcam jolting, the sound turning into chaos, Grant's voice shouting, the driver cursing, and in the back seat, a small baby cry that didn't sound like Eli's laugh at all, it sounded like pain. Colin paused the video before the worst part replayed fully, and the kitchen went silent except for the cartoon's tiny music. Grant stared at the frozen frame of the intersection like it was a monster caught mid-step, and he couldn't tell what hurt more, the crash or the proof that he had been steered into it. Wade told him to take that road, Grant said, voice hollow, and Colin nodded grimly, yes, and Tessa's face tightened. And Wade knew something about that intersection, she said, something about the timing, and Grant's mouth went dry. How? And Colin clicked another file. This one was a short audio recording, and when it played, Grant heard Wade's voice, smooth, confident, the voice Grant used to trust, saying, "Just follow the message. It has to happen today. He'll be distracted. He won't question it. After this, everything changes." And another voice answered, muffled, nervous, "What about the kid?" And Wade's reply came cold and flat, "He'll live. He's insured." And the words hit Grant like a physical blow because they reduced his child to a number, to a risk calculation, to a tool. Grant's vision blurred with tears he didn't want because crying felt weak, but the truth was he had been weak in the way that mattered. Weak in attention, weak in presence, weak in trusting the wrong man. Eli, sensing the shift in Grant's body, turned his head away from the cartoon and whispered, "Daddy?" And Grant snapped back to the moment, to his son's face, and he forced his voice to be steady. "I'm here, buddy," he said, pulling Eli close again, and Eli's little hand slid up to Grant's neck as if checking he was real. Colin's voice came quiet. "Grant, this is enough to blow Wade's life up," he said, "but we need to move carefully because he has power and he has allies." And Grant's mind raced because he could already see Wade's next play. Claim the dashcam is fake. Claim Grant is unstable. Claim the maid stole things. Claim anything that keeps the board and the court on Wade's side. "He'll say I'm imagining it," Grant whispered, and Colin answered, "Then we don't give him imagination, we give him verification." And he started making calls, not dramatic calls, disciplined calls, digital forensics, a trusted detective contact, an emergency injunction, and a meeting request to the board with a specific agenda that didn't reveal too much. Grant watched Colin work and felt something unfamiliar, a small spark of respect for process. Over emotion, because for once the process might protect the child rather than drown him. Then Grant looked at Tessa, and the question he had avoided hit him hard. "Why did you do this?" he asked, and Tessa's eyes flicked to Eli, then back to Grant, and her voice softened. "Because he's a little boy," she said simply, "and he deserves to feel safe. And because I know what it looks like when adults turn a child into a pawn." And something in her tone told Grant she wasn't speaking from theory. Grant swallowed. "Did someone do that to you?" And Tessa's mouth tightened. "Not today," she said, which was a gentle way of saying yes without turning the story into her story. Grant nodded, accepting it. Then he said the hardest words, the honest words, "I was careless." And Eli frowned at the word like he didn't understand, and Grant explained in the simplest way he could for a 4-year-old, "Daddy didn't listen enough and Daddy trusted the wrong person." And Eli stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "You stay?" And Grant answered with no hesitation, "I stay," and he meant it like a vow. The TV cartoon kept playing, bright colors in the background, while in the foreground, Grant's world rebuilt itself around one priority. Colin ended a call and looked up, face tight. "Grant, we have another problem," he said, and Grant's stomach dropped. "What?" And Colin turned his phone screen toward him, showing an incoming notification from a board member's assistant. Emergency session scheduled. Concern: Mercer's instability and recent incident at residence. Lang requested immediate review. And Grant's hands clenched because Wade had moved fast, faster than Grant expected, as if he had been waiting for Grant to snap so he could label it a breakdown. "He's already telling them," Grant said, voice sharp, and Colin nodded. He's framing today as you attacking him and panicking, possibly endangering the child. And Grant's blood ran cold because the word endangering is the word courts care about. Tessa's face tightened. He'll come for Eli, she said, and Grant's heart hammered because the betrayal wasn't done, it was escalating. Grant stood up, pacing the kitchen in tight lines like a caged animal. Then he stopped and made himself breathe because for Eli's sake he needed to be steady. We go to the board, Grant said. We show them the evidence. And Colin shook his head slightly. Not yet, he said. If we drop everything at once, Wade will claim it's fabricated and demand immediate seizure of all devices, including the one holding your copy, and he has people who can muddy the chain. And Grant snapped, so what do we do, just wait while he takes my son? And Colin held his gaze firm. We do two things now, secure Eli physically and secure evidence legally. And Tessa added, and you stay calm no matter what he says because he wants you to explode. And Grant swallowed because calm was not his strength, control was, and calm is a different kind of strength. Grant looked around the kitchen, the huge counters, the expensive appliances, the staff doors, and realized the mansion was full of exits and entrances. Too many ways for someone to show up, with a badge or a camera crew. Where's your security chief? Colin asked, and Grant's jaw tightened. Wade recommended him, and Colin's face hardened. Then assume he's compromised. And that sentence made Grant feel exposed in his own home, like the walls were listening. Grant grabbed his phone and called the one person he still trusted without question. His older sister Marin, the only relative who had never asked him for money or favors, only asked him to be human. Marin answered on the second ring, already alarmed by Grant's voice, and when he said, Marin, I need you here now, she didn't ask why, she just said, I'm coming, because family shows up when everything else is a contract. While they waited, Colin instructed Grant to move Eli to a safe room with only one entrance, no cameras that could be hacked, and Grant chose the upstairs library, a quiet space with thick doors and a window that looked over the garden. Tessa rolled Eli gently, speaking to him softly like a guide. We're going on a small adventure, she said. Library fort. And Eli clung to his stuffed dog, now back in his lap, eyes still worried but soothed by the familiar game tone. Grant followed them up the stairs and felt the ache of regret in every step because he had missed so many small adventures he could never get back. Inside the library, Grant built a simple fort with blankets and pillows, not because Eli needed it but because Grant needed to do something fatherly that wasn't about locks and codes. And Eli's mouth curved into a tiny smile when Grant crawled into the fort with him, the billionaire on his knees. Like a normal dad, and for a moment Grant saw the life he could still create if he stopped worshipping work. Then the doorbell rang downstairs, not the polite chime of a guest this time, but the sharper ring that sounded official, and Grant's spine stiffened. Colin checked the security monitor feed on his phone, but the feed was unstable after Wade's attempted wipe, flickering in and out, and Colin's face turned grim. They're here, he said, and Grant's blood turned cold. Who? And Colin answered, 2 uniformed officers, and a woman with a clipboard. And Tessa's eyes widened because every caretaker knows what a clipboard can mean, and Eli, sensing danger again, whispered, Bad man? And Grant's voice went steady as steel. No one is taking you, he promised. Then he looked at Tessa. Stay with him. And Tessa nodded, sitting beside Eli in the fort, hands gentle, while Grant and Colin moved downstairs. The front door opened to a scene that looked calm on the outside and deadly on the inside. 2 officers standing polite but serious, and beside them a social worker with a badge and a file, and behind them, half a step back like a director watching his actors, Wade Lang, expression sad and concerned like he was grieving for Grant. Grant, Wade said softly, I didn't want it to go this way but you scared people today, and Grant's hands clenched but his face stayed controlled, and that alone felt like a victory because Wade expected fireworks. The social worker introduced herself in a neutral tone and said they had received a report of a disturbance and a potential child safety concern, and the words sounded like legal glue that could stick to Grant's life. Grant's mind screamed to show them the video to expose Wade right there, but Colin stepped forward smoothly and said, We will cooperate fully, but any inquiry must be conducted in the presence of counsel, and we request that all statements be recorded. And the officers exchanged a glance. Because they weren't used to people speaking that confidently, Wade's smile tightened. Grant, don't make this worse, he murmured, and Grant finally spoke directly to Wade, voice quiet, deadly calm. Worse than you steering my child into a crash? Wade's eyes flickered, just a flicker, but he recovered instantly, turning to the officers. You see? He's making wild accusations, and Grant felt the trap trying to close, the unstable label being pressed onto him like a stamp. The social worker asked, Mr. Mercer, where's your child? And Grant answered, Safe, and she said, We need to see him. and Grant's throat tightened because letting strangers inspect Eli felt like another invasion, but refusing could look like hiding. Colin leaned toward Grant and whispered, "We do this smart. We let them see the child calm and cared for. You stay composed. That's the evidence too," and Grant nodded, then turned back. "You can see him," he said, "but you will not question him without me present, and you will not remove him from this home without a court order." And one officer said, "Sir, we're just here to check welfare," and Grant replied, "Then check it," and he led them upstairs, each step feeling like a test of his soul. In the library, Eli sat in his fort with Tessa, watching his cartoon on a tablet now, clutching his stuffed dog cheeks. Still puffy from crying but calmer, and when he saw Grant he reached out, "Daddy," and Grant's heart cracked open in front of strangers, but he kept his voice gentle. "Hi, buddy," he said, "these people are just saying hello." And Eli glanced at the uniforms and shrank back slightly, then looked at Tessa, who whispered, "It's okay," and Eli breathed again. The social worker asked simple questions. "Does he eat? Does he sleep? Does he see doctors?" And Grant answered with facts, but the questions weren't the danger. The danger was Wade standing behind them with his sad face, watching for any sign of anger, any shaky word, any reason to say, "See? He's not fit." Then the social worker's eyes landed on Tessa. "And who are you?" she asked, and Wade's voice slid in quickly. "That's the maid," he said, emphasizing the word like it reduced her value. "She was involved in the incident." And Grant felt heat rise in his chest because Wade was about to burn Tessa to save himself. Tessa stood calmly, hands at her sides, and said, "I'm the household maid, yes." And the social worker asked, "Were you alone with the child today?" And Tessa answered, "Honestly, yes, while Mr. Mercer was away." And Wade sighed dramatically. "Grant, you see? You don't even know what happens when you're gone." And those words were poison because they sounded like concern but aimed at custody. Grant's jaw tightened, then he surprised himself by speaking the truth without defense. "I haven't been present enough," he said, and Wade's eyebrows lifted as if thinking, "Got him," but Grant continued, voice steady, "And that changes now. But neglect is not what happened today. Betrayal is," and Wade's face hardened for a split second. Colin cleared his throat and said, "We have evidence that a third party has been manipulating the home systems and staff," and Wade cut in sharply, "He's inventing stories," and the officer looked uncomfortable because this was becoming a fight between rich people, the kind of fight that looks clean but ruins lives. The social worker, trying to stay neutral, asked Grant, "Mr. Mercer, have you been under unusual stress?" And Grant almost laughed because his whole life had been stress, but he answered simply, "Yes. I'm a father whose child can't walk." And the room went quiet for a second because that truth is hard to twist. Eli, hearing "can't walk," looked down at his legs, and Grant felt a stab of guilt for saying it out loud, so he quickly added, "But he's still happy, he's still loved, and he's safe." And Eli looked back up, searching Grant's face, and Grant smiled at him, the kind of smile that says, "I see you," not the kind that says, "I'm busy." Wade's voice turned sharp, impatient. "Ask him about the hallway," Wade urged the social worker, and Grant's blood ran cold because Wade was pushing them toward Eli's trauma, trying to make the child say something confusing that could be turned into danger. The social worker looked at Eli and said gently, "Sweetheart, did anything scary happen today?" And before Eli could answer, Grant knelt beside his son and said softly, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." And Eli clung to Grant's sleeve, eyes wide, and whispered, "Candyman said Daddy mad." And Grant felt the whole room tilt. Wade's face froze, then quickly changed into fake pity. "Grant, he's confused," Wade said, but Eli kept going because children don't understand cover-ups, they understand feelings. He said secret game. He said Daddy leave, and Grant's throat tightened, and the officer's eyes flicked toward Wade now because Candyman didn't sound like Grant. Grant looked at Eli, voice shaking just a little. "Who said that?" And Eli pointed, small finger aimed like a truth arrow, straight at Wade and said, "Him," and the air in the library turned heavy. Wade's face went pale for half a heartbeat before he forced a laugh. "Kids say things," he said, voice too bright. "I've always joked with him." And Colin stepped forward, calm as ice. "We have recordings," he said, and Wade snapped, "You have nothing admissible?" And Colin answered, "We will." And the social worker's expression changed slightly, not accusing but alert, because now the report looked less like father instability and more like inappropriate adult influence. Wade's eyes narrowed and Grant saw it. Wade was losing control of the room, so he would change the battlefield. Wade turned to the officers and said, "I'm requesting immediate temporary protective custody pending evaluation." And Grant's heart slammed against his ribs because Wade was actually trying to remove Eli right now. The social worker hesitated. "That's not a decision made on the spot." But Wade cut in. "Then remove the maid," he demanded, pointing at Tessa. she accessed restricted areas, she interfered with security, she's unstable, and Grant's rage surged, but he held it down like a man holding a wild animal by the throat, because exploding would hand Wade the victory. Grant stood up, voice firm, "Tessa is not leaving," and Wade's eyes glittered. "Then you're choosing a maid over your own legal safety," he hissed, and Grant stepped closer, low and controlled. "I'm choosing my son over your lies," and Colin's phone buzzed again, a message flashing on screen, "Digital wipe completed on main hub," and Colin's jaw tightened because Wade had succeeded in erasing the mansion copy, which meant the memory card in Colin's hand was now the only living piece of that truth. Wade, as if sensing it, stared directly at Colin's pocket where the card reader sat, and his eyes sharpened with the focus of a man who sees the last thread holding his secret. "What do you have?" Wade asked, voice suddenly calm in a terrifying way, and Colin didn't answer, which was answer enough. Wade smiled thinly and said, "Grant, you can't protect him with a file," and Grant replied, "I'm not protecting him with a file. I'm protecting him with me," and he turned back to Eli, gently smoothing his hair. "Buddy, look at me," he whispered, and Eli's eyes locked onto his, and Grant said, "No one is taking you," and Eli nodded, trembling but trusting, and that trust felt like the most expensive thing Grant had ever held. The social worker, now caught between a powerful businessman's demand and a child pointing a finger, said she needed to make calls and follow protocol, and the officer stepped back, not wanting to be used as pawns, and Wade's jaw clenched because delay was not what he wanted. He wanted quick removal, quick control, quick silence. Then Wade did something that made Grant's stomach drop. He leaned down to Eli's level with a soft voice. "Hey champ," he said, "tell them the truth, okay? Tell them your dad yelled and scared you," and the manipulation was so clear it was almost unreal. Grant's body tensed, but before he could speak, Eli's small face crumpled with confusion, torn between adult voices, and he whispered, "Daddy, not leave," like he was begging the room to stop. And in that fragile moment, Grant realized the deepest harm Wade had done wasn't the papers. It was putting weight on a child's mind that was never meant to carry adult games. Grant took Eli's hand and said, softly, "You don't have to choose adults, Eli. Adults choose you," and he looked up at the officers and the social worker and spoke with a steady honesty that felt like ripping off armor. "I have been absent. I regret it every day. But I am present now, and I am asking you to do your job without being used." And the social worker's eyes softened slightly because regret spoken calmly looks different than rage. Wade's face tightened, and Grant saw the last move forming behind Wade's eyes. The move that doesn't require proof, only power. Wade straightened, pulled out his phone, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Fine. If you won't act, I will." And he hit one button, then another, and within seconds Grant's own security chief, handpicked by Wade, appeared in the doorway with two men in suits behind him. "Mr. Mercer," the chief said carefully, "we have instructions to secure company assets and ensure the child's safety due to the board's emergency order." And Grant's blood ran cold because Wade had just turned the board into a weapon and the home into a hostile place. And as the men stepped forward, Wade's eyes locked onto Colin and said quietly, "Hand over the evidence, and this can stay polite." And Grant's heart pounded as he stood between strangers and his son, realizing the next minute would decide whether Eli stayed with the father who finally woke up, or got pulled into a courtroom story built by the man who caused the crash. Grant didn't raise his hands like a man surrendering, he raised them like a father drawing a line, palms open but shoulders squared, and he stepped between Eli's wheelchair and the doorway where his security chief stood with those two stiff men in suits. And for the first time in years the mansion didn't feel like Grant Mercer's home, it felt like a stage where other people thought they could direct his life, and that realization hit him with a hot wave of regret because he had allowed it, not by being poor or weak, but by being careless in the one way that matters most. Careless with attention, careless with trust, careless with time. Wade Lang stood behind the uniforms like a smiling shadow, not shouting, not threatening, just watching Grant the way a person watches a lock they already know the code to, and Wade said softly, "Grant, please don't make this ugly," and Grant heard the trick in that sentence because Wade didn't mean ugly like violence, Wade meant ugly like headlines, court orders, public embarrassment, the kind of ugly that ruins a father's chance to hold his child without permission. The social worker's eyes kept darting from Wade to Eli to Grant as if she could feel the power struggle, and the two officers stood in the background, unsure who they were supposed to believe because the truth is this. When rich people fight, the room fills with confusion fast and children suffer first. Eli's little fingers tightened around his stuffed dog, and his eyes fixed on Grant's face like Grant's expression was the only map to safety, and that look, pure reliance, made Grant's throat tighten because Eli was only for an already learning a dangerous lesson, that adults can change the rules whenever they want. Grant breathed in, slow, then looked straight at his security chief and said, You work for me? And the chief swallowed and answered carefully, Sir, I work under board direction when there is a safety concern. And Wade nodded like a proud teacher, and that smugness lit a fire under Grant, not the reckless fire of anger, but the steady fire of clarity. Grant turned his head slightly to Colin Pierce, and Colin's calm face gave him a silent signal, the kind lawyers give when the law is about to become a weapon too, and Grant understood what he needed to do next. He couldn't win this by shouting, he had to win it by staying composed while everyone watched, because Wade's entire plan depended on Grant looking unstable. Grant knelt beside Eli, so his son would see his eyes up close, and he spoke in the simplest voice a child could trust. Eli, look at me, okay? And Eli nodded, lower lip trembling, and Grant said, No one is taking you away, I promise. And Eli whispered, You stay? And Grant answered, I stay. Then he kissed Eli's forehead, stood up, and faced the room like a man who finally remembered he was the parent. You want safety? Grant said, voice steady. Then here is safety. Nobody touches my child without a court order, and nobody questions him like he's a witness in a grown-up fight. And the social worker opened her mouth to respond, but Wade stepped in smoothly. Grant, you're emotional and you're making demands, he said. This is exactly why the board is concerned. And Grant felt the old urge to snap, to spill rage, to prove he cared by being loud. But he swallowed that urge because caring is not volume. Caring is staying. He looked at Wade and said quietly, You're not concerned about Eli. You're concerned about control. And Wade's smile tightened. There you go again with these accusations, he said. Then he gestured toward Tessa like she was a problem. This maid has been filling your head. And Tessa's face stayed calm, but Grant saw the worry in her eyes because she knew Wade would try to break her first. Grant turned to the social worker and said, I want this recorded. And Colin raised his phone. Already recording. And the officers visibly straightened because recording changes behavior. Wade's eyes flickered to Colin's pocket where the copied evidence was hidden, and Grant saw it. The hunger to destroy that last proof. So Grant did the one thing Wade did not expect. He stopped fighting for control of the room and started fighting for control of the timeline. Everybody, Grant said, we are going to do this the right way right now. And he nodded to Colin, call the judge. And Wade laughed, sharp and fake, you can't just call a judge. But Colin already had. His phone pressed to his ear, using connections built for exactly this kind of emergency. While Colin spoke in low legal language, Grant turned to the officers and said, You are here for welfare, yes? And one officer nodded, Yes, sir. And Grant pointed gently toward Wade. Then note this. The child just identified this man as the one who told him to keep secrets, the same man who now wants to remove him. And Wade's smile fell for a second and he snapped, That is ridiculous. And Grant didn't argue, he simply said, You heard what you heard. And that made Wade angry because it didn't give him a debate to twist. The social worker, now cautious, said, Mr. Mercer, we will follow protocol, but if there is a valid report, and Grant cut in, polite but firm, then investigate the right person. And he looked at Wade, because if you're truly concerned, you won't mind answering questions. And Wade scoffed. I have nothing to answer. But his eyes were already calculating exits. And Grant realized Wade's confidence was cracking because this was no longer a private chess game, it was becoming a recorded event. Colin ended his call, face focused, and said, We have a temporary protective order hearing in 30 minutes by video. And Wade's jaw clenched. On what grounds? He demanded, and Colin replied, On grounds of attempted unlawful interference, evidence tampering, and child manipulation. And Wade's face hardened. You're insane, he said. You're going to destroy your own company. And Grant heard the threat in that because Wade was implying he would burn everything if he couldn't own it. Grant glanced at Eli, then made a decision that felt like tearing off a bandage. Let it burn, he said quietly, if that's the price of keeping my son safe. And those words shocked the room because they were not billionaire words, they were father words. Wade's eyes narrowed. You think you can just walk away from everything? He hissed. You built this with me? And Grant's chest tightened because it was true, he had built the empire and invited Wade into it. But then he looked at Eli's small frame and realized the empire wasn't worth more than a child's piece. I built a company, Grant said, and I failed at being present. Then he added, voice steady, I won't fail again. And Wade's lips curled. That's cute, he said. But you're still careless, Grant. You're just being careless in a different direction. And the word careless hit Grant like a punch because it carried truth. But Grant finally understood the difference between careless and brave. Brave is choosing what matters and owning the cost. The video hearing began quickly in Colin's laptop, the judge appearing on screen in a plain room, and as the judge asked basic questions, Grant answered without drama, admitting what he had to admit and denying what he could deny with evidence. While Wade tried to look calm and wronged, Wade claimed Grant was unstable, claimed Grant had accused him without proof, claimed the maid was manipulating him, and he leaned hard into one story: Grant is grieving and paranoid. But then Colin presented the copied files not as a grand reveal, but as simple steps a child could understand: messages, audio, and the dashcam clip. When the judge watched the moment where the driver received Wade's instruction to change route, the judge's face tightened, and the courtroom tone shifted from family concern to serious misconduct. Wade's lawyer, because Wade already had one on standby, tried to object, tried to say the footage could be altered, but Colin calmly stated he had already contacted digital forensics and would deliver devices for verification, and the judge granted an immediate order. No removal of Eli, no contact between Wade and the child, immediate preservation of evidence, and a directive for law enforcement to open an investigation. Wade's face went pale, and for the first time his mask cracked fully because he realized the game had changed from boardroom tricks to criminal exposure. The officers received a call right there, stepped aside, and returned with new posture, the posture of people who now saw Wade as a possible suspect, not a worried friend. Wade tried to smile it off, tried to say, "This is a misunderstanding," but his voice sounded thinner now, like paper. Grant didn't celebrate because this wasn't a win like a business deal, it was a rescue from a fire he should have noticed earlier. As the hearing ended, the social worker's tone softened. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "we will close this visit as ongoing evaluation pending investigation, but your child appears cared for," and Grant nodded, "Thank you," and he kept it simple because the most important audience for his behavior was not the adults, it was Eli. Then Marin arrived, hair slightly messy from rushing, eyes sharp with protective love, and she took one look at Eli and dropped to her knees, hugging him carefully. "Hey little man," she whispered, and Eli clung to her too, and Grant felt shame again because Eli was collecting people for safety like a child builds walls out of hugs. Wade tried to slip toward the door while everyone focused on paperwork, but Grant spoke one sentence that stopped him cold. "Eli's legs," Grant said quietly. And Wade froze and the whole room turned. Grant stepped closer, voice controlled, "Tell me why you did it," and Wade's eyes flashed with something ugly, then he shrugged like he was bored. "Business," he said. And that one word was the most heartbreaking answer Grant could hear, because it meant Wade had looked at a child and seen only a lever. Grant's fists clenched and he felt the urge to shout, but he didn't because shouting would be for his pride, and pride was what got him careless in the first place. "You didn't just betray me," Grant said, "you poisoned my child's sense of safety," and Wade smirked, trying to sting back. "You did that yourself when you chose meetings over bedtime," and this time Grant didn't deny it, he let it land because denial was another kind of carelessness. Grant nodded once, slow. "You're right," he said, and the room went quiet because rich men rarely admit fault. "I was absent," Grant continued, "and my son paid for it." Then he looked toward the officers. "But he won't pay any more," and that was when a second twist slid into the room quietly, not with loud drama, but with a simple statement from Marin that changed everything. "Grant," she said softly, "Mom kept a letter," and Grant turned, confused, and Marin reached into her bag and pulled out an old envelope, worn at the edges like it had been opened and closed many times. "She told me to give you this if anything ever happened," Marin said, and Grant's throat tightened because their mother had passed years ago and he hadn't thought about letters or warnings in a long time. Grant took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it, and inside was a short note in plain handwriting. "If Wade ever gets too close, be careful. He is not loyal. He only loves doors he can open." And attached to the note was a copy of an old newspaper article about Wade's past company collapsing after a partner's mysterious accident, an accident never proven but always whispered about. Grant stared at it, stomach sinking because it meant the danger wasn't random, it was a pattern, and the saddest part was he had been warned and ignored it, because he had been too busy building. Wade's eyes narrowed as he saw the paper and his voice went low. "That's nonsense." But his hands were shaking slightly now, and shaking hands are honest. The officer stepped closer, asking Wade to remain while they clarified some things, and Wade's lawyer began talking fast. But the truth was already breaking through like sunlight through a cracked curtain. Wade wasn't dragged out like a movie villain, he was escorted out under polite pressure, and somehow that was worse, because it proved betrayal doesn't always wear a mask and run. Sometimes it wears a suit. And walks out calmly while your child sits inside a fort wondering why adults lie. When the door finally closed behind Wade and the house got quiet again, Grant felt his body sag like he had been holding up a wall with his spine. He looked at Tessa, the woman Wade called just a maid, and he said, "You saved my son." And Tessa shook her head gently. "I kept him from being alone," she corrected. And that correction hit Grant harder than praise because it showed him exactly what he had failed to do. Grant swallowed, eyes burning. I don't know how to repay you, and Tessa's gaze flicked to Eli then back. Be the father he keeps looking for, she said, and there was no judgment in it, only truth. Later, when the adults cleared out and the mansion stopped feeling like a courtroom, Grant went back upstairs to the library fort and crawled inside with Eli the way he had earlier, but this time he didn't bring a phone, didn't bring a laptop, didn't bring any screen, he brought only himself. Eli touched Grant's cheek with tiny fingers as if checking he was real and whispered, Candyman gone? And Grant nodded, he's gone. Then he added, and I'm sorry, and Eli frowned, sorry why? And Grant took a slow breath and chose the simplest words, because I wasn't listening enough, he said. I was busy and I should have been with you more. And Eli's eyes widened and for a second Grant worried he had said too much. But then Eli whispered, you stay now? And Grant answered, yes. And Eli nodded like that was the only thing he needed. Grant held his son and felt grief and love mix into something steady, and in that moment he made a promise not just with words but with action. He called his assistant and canceled the next week of meetings, he called the board and demanded a formal investigation into Wade's actions, and he ordered an independent security overhaul not based on paranoia but on transparency. He also did something that scared him more than any business risk. He admitted publicly that he had been struggling, that he had been absent, and that he was stepping back from daily control to focus on his child, because he finally understood that control was not strength if it cost him the person he loved most. Days turned into weeks and the mansion changed not by adding more guards, but by adding more life. Breakfast at the table every morning with Eli, music games with spoons that turned into real little drum lessons, afternoon story time in the library. Fort therapy sessions that Grant attended not as a boss watching, but as a dad cheering, and when Eli had hard days he stared at his legs and asked, why no run? Grant didn't hide behind money or quick distractions, he sat beside him and said, I don't know everything but I know I'm with you, and that simple presence slowly rewired Eli's fear. Tessa stayed for a while not because Grant begged her, but because Eli trusted her, and Grant respected that trust enough not to make it about his ego. In time the investigation moved forward, Wade's web of schemes unraveled, and the most painful truth became the most freeing one. The crash was not just bad luck, it was the result of someone else's manipulation combined with Grant's distracted yes, and Grant couldn't change the past, but he could change who he became after it. The real ending wasn't Wade losing power, it was Grant learning that a father's attention is not optional, it is a lifeline, and the life-changing lesson hit Grant like a quiet thunder. The most dangerous thing a parent can do is assume love is understood without being shown. On a warm morning months later, Grant sat in the garden with Eli on a blanket, sunlight on their faces, and Eli giggled as Grant tapped a silly rhythm on the grass, and Eli tapped back with two small sticks, and Grant realized the sound of his child laughing freely wasn't just joy. It was healing. If this story touched you, comment where you're watching from and tell me one thing you learned from Grant and Eli's journey, because sometimes the biggest betrayals don't just steal money, they steal time, and time is the one thing we can't buy back. Like this video if you want more life-changing stories with twists, love, regret, and redemption, and subscribe to this channel to support our growth.